Car dealer laughed at black woman wanting a sports car. Next day, she bought the whole company. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floor of Preston Luxury Motors as Danielle Harris pushed through the heavy glass doors. The familiar ache in her shoulders reminded her of the 12-hour day she just finished at her mechanic shop, wrestling with a stubborn transmission on Mrs. Chen's old Honda. Her hands, despite 3 rounds of scrubbing with industrial soap, still bore the telltale stains of engine oil beneath her fingernails. She paused just inside the entrance, taking in the pristine showroom that gleamed like a jewelry store. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting rainbow prisms across the immaculate vehicles displayed like precious gems. The air smelled of new leather and expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the honest scent of motor oil and metal that clung to her worn jeans and faded blue t-shirt. At the center of the showroom sat a gleaming red Porsche 911 Turbo S, its curves catching the light like liquid fire. Danielle had always admired German engineering, and this particular model had been on her mind since she'd read about its specs in Motor Trend last month. The 640 horsepower, the precise steering, the way it could go from 0 to 60 in just 26 seconds, it was mechanical poetry in motion. As she approached the vehicle, running her callous fingers along its pristine hood, she heard the sharp click of expensive shoes against marble. A tall man in a navy suit approached, his blonde hair slicked back with what looked like half a bottle of gel. His smile was wide but cold, like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Ma'am, can I help you with something?" Mark Benson's voice carried the practiced politeness of someone in sales, but his eyes were already dismissing her, taking in her oil-stained appearance with barely concealed disdain. "I'm interested in this Porsche," Danielle said simply, her voice steady despite the way his gaze made her skin crawl. "Could you tell me about the engine specifications and available packages?" Mark's eyebrows shot up, and he let out a short laugh that echoed off the showroom's high ceiling. "The Porsche? This beauty right here?" He patted the car's roof with a proprietary gesture. "Ma'am, this vehicle starts at $230,000. That's before taxes, licensing, and any additional packages. I understand the pricing structure of luxury vehicles," Danielle replied, her mechanic's knowledge evident in her tone. "I'm particularly interested in the PDK transmission and the Sport Chrono package. Does this model come with the ceramic composite brakes?" For a moment, Mark looked genuinely surprised by her technical knowledge. Then his expression shifted back to condescending amusement. "Look, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but maybe you'd be more comfortable looking at something in your price range. We have a nice certified pre-owned section out back. Some real practical vehicles, reliable, affordable." The words stung more than Danielle expected. She'd heard variations of this dismissal her entire life, but it never got easier. The assumption that her appearance, her race, her gender somehow predetermined her bank account balance. The casual cruelty of it made her chest tighten with familiar anger. "I see," she said quietly, her hands sliding into her pockets. "And what makes you think you know my price range?" Mark's laugh was louder this time, attracting the attention of other salespeople and customers nearby. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's be realistic here. You just got off work at what, a tire shop? A quick lube place?" His eyes traveled over her stained clothing with theatrical disgust. "This car costs more than most people make in 5 years. I'm trying to save us both some time." A well-dressed couple nearby turned to stare, the woman whispering something to her husband behind a manicured hand. 2 other salespeople had paused their conversations, watching the interaction with the morbid fascination of witnesses to a car accident. Danielle felt the familiar heat of humiliation creep up her neck, but she kept her voice level. "I own a mechanic shop," she corrected, though she wasn't sure why she bothered. "And I understand automotive engineering better than most people who walk through these doors." "A mechanic shop," Mark repeated, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "That's adorable. Look, I'm sure you know your way around an oil change, but this isn't exactly a 1998 Honda Civic we're talking about here. This is precision German engineering for serious collectors and enthusiasts who can actually afford to maintain it properly. The implication hung in the air like toxic smoke. Danielle felt something cold settle in her stomach, not just anger, but a calculating stillness that she recognized from her grandmother's stories about surviving in a world that constantly underestimated strong women. I see, she said again, her voice so quiet that Mark had to lean forward to hear her. And you've determined all of this from looking at my clothes? Honey, I've been in this business for 8 years, Mark said, his confidence growing with each word. I can spot a time waster from across the room. You know what I'm saying? It's not personal, it's just business. Maybe save up for a few more years, get yourself a nice down payment together, and come back when you're ready to have a serious conversation about serious money. The other customers were no longer pretending not to listen. A teenage boy with his father pointed openly, and Danielle heard the word, embarrassing, float across the showroom. The well-dressed woman from earlier was now recording with her phone, probably planning to share the crazy woman who thought she could afford a Porsche story with her social media followers. Danielle looked at Mark for a long moment, studying his smug expression, the way he positioned himself between her and the car like a guard protecting treasure from a thief. She thought about her grandmother, who taught her that sometimes the best response to cruelty was a silence that promised future reckoning. Thank you for your time, she said finally, her voice carrying a strange finality that seemed to unsettle Mark slightly. Hey, no hard feelings, he called after her as she turned toward the door. Like I said, maybe in a few years. Keep working hard, and who knows? His laughter followed her across the marble floor, joined by snickers from the watching crowd. Danielle didn't look back as she pushed through the glass doors into the evening air. She didn't see the way Mark high-fived one of his colleagues, or hear him regaling the story to anyone who would listen about that delusional woman, who thought she could afford a $250,000 car. As she walked to her modest pickup truck in the parking lot, Danielle's hands were steady, but her mind was racing. The humiliation burned in her chest, but underneath it was something else, something cold and patient and utterly determined. Mark Benson had made a mistake today, though he didn't know it yet. He'd looked at Danielle Harris and seen only what he expected to see, a working-class woman who didn't belong in his gleaming world of luxury and privilege. He never bothered to look deeper, to wonder why a mechanic might have such detailed knowledge of high-end automotive engineering, or why her questions about the Porsche had been so specifically technical. Most importantly, he never thought to ask himself a simple question: what if he was wrong? As Danielle drove home through the quiet streets of her small town, that question hung in the air between them like a promise, one that would be answered sooner than Mark Benson could possibly imagine. The modest 2-story house at the end of Maple Street looked exactly like what a small-town mechanic could afford: white picket fence, a garden that needed weeding, and a driveway stained with oil spots from years of working on cars. Danielle pulled her pickup next to the garage and sat for a moment, letting the engine tick as it cooled. The humiliation from the dealership still burned in her chest like acid. She walked through her front door, past the comfortable but unremarkable furniture, past the family photos that showed 3 generations of Harris women who'd learned to survive by being underestimated. In her small home office, she settled into the worn leather chair that had belonged to her grandmother and opened her laptop. The screen illuminated her face as she logged into an account that would have made Mark Benson's jaw drop. Harris Holdings LLC showed a portfolio worth $847 million, spread across real estate investments, technology stocks, and a significant stake in something called Meridian Automotive Group. Most people in town knew the story, or thought they did. Danielle's grandmother, Ruby Harris, had owned a small plot of land on what everyone thought was the worthless side of town. When Ruby died 5 years ago, Danielle had been forced to sell the property to pay for the funeral and settle debts. What they didn't know was that the worthless land had been sitting directly in the path of a planned shopping development. The developer had paid Danielle $50,000 for the land, thinking he was getting a bargain from a grieving granddaughter who didn't know better. He was half right. Danielle had been grieving. But she'd known exactly what that land was worth. She'd also known that $50,000 was enough to secure a much larger deal brewing in the background. Through her grandmother's old friend, a retired investment banker named Eleanor Washington, Danielle had learned that Meridian Automotive Group was looking for silent investors. The company was expanding rapidly, buying up luxury car dealerships across 3 states. They needed cash, and they needed it quietly. Danielle had taken her $50,000 and, through careful leverage and Eleanor's guidance, turned it into a 12% stake in Meridian Automotive. That was 3 years ago, when the company was worth $180 million. Today, that same stake was worth over $400 million, and she'd quietly purchased additional shares whenever the opportunity arose. She scrolled through her investment portfolio, her anger from the afternoon transforming into something colder and more focused. Meridian Automotive Group owned 43 luxury dealerships, including Preston Luxury Motors, the very place where Mark Benson had laughed at her just hours ago. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Saw the quarterly reports. MAG is performing beautifully. Your instincts were right as usual. Coffee tomorrow? Danielle stared at the message, then at her computer screen showing her substantial holdings. She thought about Mark's laugh echoing through the marble showroom, about the way other customers had stared at her like she was some kind of circus act, about the teenage boy who'd pointed at her like she was a cautionary tale. She opened a new browser tab and navigated to Meridian's internal investor portal. According to the latest shareholder report, the current majority stakeholder owned 34% of the company. The remaining shares were distributed among smaller investors, with her own 28% stake making her the second largest shareholder. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she calculated the numbers. If she could acquire just 7% more shares, she would have controlling interest. She scrolled through the recent trading activity and found what she was looking for. Several smaller shareholders had been quietly selling their positions over the past month, likely taking profits after the company's strong performance. Danielle picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Eleanor's number. It was nearly 10 p.m., but she knew her mentor would answer. Danielle? What's wrong, honey? You sound different. Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. If I wanted to acquire majority control of Meridian Automotive Group, could it be done quickly and quietly? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Theoretically, yes. There's been some movement in the smaller shareholdings lately. But Danielle, that would require a significant investment. We're talking about another $200 million, maybe more. What's brought this on? Danielle looked around her modest living room, at the second-hand couch she'd bought at a garage sale, at the stack of automotive magazines on her coffee table, at the simple life she'd built to keep her real identity hidden. Someone made a mistake today, she said quietly. Someone looked at me and decided they knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. They decided I didn't belong in their world. Oh, honey. Eleanor's voice softened with understanding. What happened? It doesn't matter what happened. What matters is what happens next. I want you to start reaching out to the Meridian shareholders who've been selling. Quietly. And I want you to find out everything you can about Preston Luxury Motors, their management structure, their performance metrics, their employee complaints. Everything. Danielle, are you sure about this? Once you become the majority shareholder, there's no going back to your quiet life. People will want to know who you are, where your money came from. Danielle closed her eyes and saw Mark's smug face again, heard his condescending laughter, felt the eyes of every person in that showroom judging her based on her appearance. Maybe it's time people knew, she said. Maybe I've been hiding long enough. All right then, Eleanor said, and Danielle could hear the smile in her voice. I'll make some calls first thing in the morning. This is going to be interesting. After hanging up, Danielle sat in the quiet of her living room, planning her next move. Tomorrow would bring a conversation that would change everything. Tomorrow, Mark Benson would learn that appearances could be very, very deceiving. Danielle woke at 5 a.m. to the sound of her phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen, and she answered before the second ring. I've been up all night working the phones. Eleanor's voice crackled with excitement. You're not going to believe what I found. 3 of the smaller shareholders are eager to sell. They need quick cash for other investments. Combined with 2 institutional investors who want to liquidate their positions, we're looking at exactly 85% of Meridian available for immediate purchase. Danielle sat up in bed, her mind already calculating. That would give me 365% majority control. Exactly. But there's more. I did some digging into Preston Luxury Motors specifically. Their customer satisfaction scores are abysmal, and they've had 17 formal complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau in the past 2 years. All of them mentioned the same salesperson by name. Mark Benson, Danielle said, though it wasn't really a question. The very same. Apparently your experience yesterday wasn't unique. There are complaints about discriminatory treatment, inappropriate comments to female customers, and what one complainant called systematic prejudice against minority buyers. The dealership's regional manager has been ignoring the complaints because Benson's sales numbers are good. Danielle felt a cold satisfaction settle in her chest. What about the purchase timeline? If you give me the green light this morning, I can have the paperwork filed by noon. The shares will transfer immediately. Meridian's board won't even know what happened until they receive the notification this afternoon. By tomorrow morning, you'll be the majority shareholder with full authority to restructure management at any of the dealerships. Danielle walked to her kitchen window and looked out at the quiet street where she'd lived anonymously for years. Mrs. Peterson next door was already in her garden, tending to roses that had been Ruby's pride and joy. The mailman, Jerry, would wave at her in a few hours, just like he did every morning, never knowing he was greeting one of the wealthiest women in the state. The money? Danielle asked. I can arrange a secured loan against your existing Meridian shares. The bank won't even blink. They'll be lending against assets worth more than the loan amount. Clean, quick, and it preserves your cash reserves for other opportunities. Danielle thought about Mark's laugh, about the way he'd positioned himself between her and the car like she was some kind of threat. She thought about all the other customers over the years who'd been treated the same way, who'd walked out of that dealership feeling small and unwanted. Do it, she said quietly. Danielle, once I make these calls, there's no turning back. Are you absolutely certain? Make the calls, Eleanor. All of them. For the next 3 hours, Danielle's phone rang constantly. Eleanor coordinating with lawyers, bankers calling to confirm wire transfers, accountants updating portfolio statements. Danielle mechanically answered their questions while getting dressed for what would normally be another day at the shop. By 11 a.m., she was sitting in Eleanor's downtown office, watching her mentor work magic with a combination of charm and ruthless business acumen. The older woman moved through the calls like a conductor leading an orchestra, coordinating the complex dance of share transfers, loan approvals, and legal documentation. The Morrison family just signed, Eleanor announced, hanging up from yet another call. That's another 28%. We're at 351% and climbing. Danielle's phone buzzed with notifications from her banking app, millions of dollars moving in and out of accounts as the acquisitions finalized. Each transaction brought her closer to majority control, closer to the moment when she could walk back into Preston Luxury Motors as its owner rather than its victim. The institutional investors are ready to close, Eleanor said, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. That's the final 34% we need. As soon as these documents are signed and filed, Meridian Automotive Group will have a new majority shareholder. At exactly 12:43 p.m., Eleanor's computer chimed with an email confirmation from Meridian's transfer agent. The acquisition was complete. Danielle Harris now owned 365% of Meridian Automotive Group, making her the company's majority shareholder and giving her the authority to hire, fire, and restructure management at any of their 43 locations. Congratulations, Eleanor said, raising her coffee cup in a mock toast. You now own the dealership where you were humiliated yesterday. Danielle stared at the confirmation email on Eleanor's screen, feeling the weight of what she'd just accomplished. In less than 18 hours, she'd gone from being laughed at in a car showroom to owning the entire company that operated it. Her phone buzzed with a text from her shop foreman. 3 customers waiting for you. Where are you? She looked at the message and made a decision. Eleanor, can you handle the legal notifications to Meridian's board? Already drafted. They'll receive formal notice within the hour. Good. I have a business to run. Danielle stood up, smoothing down her work clothes. Tomorrow morning, I'll be paying Preston Luxury Motors another visit. But first, I need to finish Mrs. Chen's transmission. Eleanor laughed. Only you would close a $200 million acquisition and then go change someone's oil. It's who I am, Danielle said simply. That's never going to change, no matter how many companies I own. As she drove back to her shop, Danielle felt a strange calm settling over her. The hardest part was over. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning Mark Benson had unknowingly earned for himself. The next morning, Danielle stood in front of her bedroom mirror adjusting the collar of a charcoal gray power suit she'd bought 2 years ago but never worn. The tailored jacket transformed her completely. Gone was the small-town mechanic in oil-stained jeans, replaced by a woman who looked like she belonged in boardrooms and corner offices. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Board notification complete. Regional Manager and Dealership GM will be at Preston by 10 a.m. for routine inspection. Perfect timing for your arrival. Danielle smiled grimly. She'd specifically requested that the regional manager be present when she made her appearance. Some conversations required witnesses. At 9:45 a.m., she pulled into the Preston Luxury Motors parking lot in a rented black Mercedes S-Class, Eleanor's suggestion for making the right impression. Through the showroom's floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Mark Benson gesturing animatedly to a couple examining a silver BMW. His confident posture and broad smile were exactly the same as they'd been 2 days ago when he dismissed her so cruelly. Danielle walked through the same glass doors, but this time every eye in the showroom turned toward her for different reasons. The expensive suit, the confident stride, the leather briefcase. She commanded attention in a way that made people unconsciously step aside. Mark spotted her immediately, his expression shifting from confusion to smug recognition. He excused himself from his customers and approached with the same predatory smile he'd worn before. Well, well, he said loud enough for nearby staff to hear. Look who's back. Let me guess, you won the lottery? Hit it big at the casino. His laugh was sharp and mocking. Or maybe you're here to apply for a job? We're always looking for good detailees. The other salespeople chuckled appreciatively at their colleagues' wit. Danielle noticed several customers watching the interaction with uncomfortable fascination, sensing drama brewing but not understanding its source. Actually, Danielle said calmly, I'm here to see the manager. Is he available? The manager? Mark's eyebrows shot up in theatrical surprise. Sweetheart, if this is about your little tantrum yesterday, filing a complaint isn't going to change anything. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone, especially people who waste our time. I see, Danielle replied, her voice carrying an odd note that made Mark's smile falter slightly. And where might I find him? Before Mark could respond, a nervous-looking man in his 50s emerged from the back offices, followed by a stern woman in a navy business suit. The man, presumably the dealership's general manager, was speaking in hushed, urgent tones to the woman, who could only be the regional manager Eleanor had mentioned. Mr. Davidson, the woman was saying, her voice carrying across the showroom. We've received some very concerning information from corporate. There's been a major change in ownership that... She stopped mid-sentence when she spotted Danielle, her eyes widening with recognition. Eleanor had clearly provided a description. Ms. Harris? The regional manager stepped forward, extending her hand. I'm Patricia Chin, regional manager for Meridian Automotive Group. We've been expecting you. The showroom fell silent. Mark's confident expression cracked as he looked between Danielle and the regional manager, confusion replacing arrogance. Ms. Harris, Patricia continued, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. On behalf of Meridian Automotive Group, I want to personally welcome you to Preston Luxury Motors. As our new majority shareholder, we're honored to have you here for this inspection. The words hit the showroom like a physical blow. Mark's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The other salespeople stood frozen, suddenly understanding that they'd been watching their colleague mock their new owner. Danielle turned to face Mark directly, her voice calm and professional. "Mr. Benson, isn't it? I believe we met yesterday. You were quite helpful in explaining your customer service philosophy." That wasn't. I mean, I didn't know." Mark stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "You didn't know what?" Danielle asked with genuine curiosity. "You didn't know I could afford a car? You didn't know I owned this dealership? Or you didn't know that treating customers based on their appearance might have consequences?" The general manager, Davidson, stepped forward nervously. "Ms. Harris, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Danielle interrupted gently. "Mr. Benson was very clear yesterday. He determined from looking at my clothes that I was wasting his time. He laughed at me in front of your other customers. He suggested I come back in a few years when I might be ready for a serious conversation about serious money." Patricia Chen's expression darkened as she turned to Mark. "Is this true, Mr. Benson?" Mark looked around the showroom desperately, seeking support that wasn't coming. The other employees had suddenly found their shoes fascinating, and the customers were openly staring at the unfolding drama. "Look, she didn't look like a typical customer," Mark said weakly. "I was just being practical about qualifying prospects. It's basic sales technique." "Basic sales technique," Danielle repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what you call it when you tell a potential customer they should go look at certified pre-owned cars out back? When you pat a car's roof like you own it, and tell someone they can't afford it without even asking what they're looking for?" "I was protecting the inventory," Mark protested, his voice rising. "People come in here all the time just to waste our time, to take pictures with cars they'll never buy. I was being efficient." "Efficient?" Danielle nodded. "And how efficient was it when you made sure everyone in the showroom could hear you dismissing me? When you encouraged them to laugh along with you? Was that part of your customer qualification process too?" The silence in the showroom was deafening. Mark looked like a man watching his career evaporate in real time, which, Danielle realized with cold satisfaction, was exactly what was happening. Patricia Chen cleared her throat. "Mr. Benson, I think we need to have a private conversation. My office." "Now. Actually," Danielle said quietly, "I'd prefer if we handled this here. In front of everyone. The same audience that witnessed yesterday's performance should hear how this story ends." Mark's legs seemed to give out slightly, and he steadied himself against the Porsche he'd been so protective of just 24 hours earlier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Mark straightened up, his salesman instincts kicking in as he attempted damage control. His smile returned, though it trembled at the edges like a house of cards in a gentle breeze. "Ms. Harris, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding here," he said, his voice taking on the smooth, practiced tone he used with difficult customers. "What happened yesterday, that was just playful banter, you know. A little joke between professionals. I was actually trying to help you by steering you toward more practical options." Danielle tilted her head slightly, studying him with the patience of a mechanic diagnosing a complicated engine problem. "A joke?" she repeated quietly. "You found it amusing to assume I couldn't afford to be here." "Not at all." Mark's laugh sounded forced and desperate. "Look, in sales we deal with all kinds of people. Sometimes you have to read the room, you know. I was just being— what's the word? Realistic about expectations. It wasn't personal." Patricia Chen stepped forward, her tablet in hand. "Mr. Benson, since this seems to be a pattern, perhaps you'd like to explain some other jokes from your record." She scrolled through her screen. "Mrs. Rodriguez, who filed a complaint 3 months ago about you telling her that luxury cars probably weren't her thing and suggesting she look at economy models?" Mark's confident facade began to crack. That was taken out of context. Or Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, an African-American couple who complained that you kept asking if they were sure they could handle the payments on a car they'd already been pre-approved for? Every salesperson asks about financing." Mark protested, sweat now visible on his forehead. That's standard practice. What about Sarah Chin, no relation to me, a 25-year-old software engineer who complained that you told her she should bring her husband or father next time to discuss the technical aspects of the vehicle she wanted to purchase? The general manager, Davidson, was now staring at Mark with undisguised horror. Mark, please tell me these reports are exaggerated. They're blown out of proportion, Mark said, his voice rising with desperation. People today get offended by everything. You can't even have a normal conversation without someone crying discrimination. I've been selling cars for 8 years, and my numbers are solid. My commission last quarter was higher than anyone else on the floor. Your numbers, Danielle said softly, and something in her tone made the entire showroom go quiet again. Tell me, Mr. Benson, how do you think your numbers would look if you hadn't driven away customers who didn't fit your idea of what a luxury car buyer should look like? Mark opened his mouth to respond, but Danielle continued. How many sales did you lose because you decided someone wasn't worth your time based on their appearance? How many referrals never happened because you made people feel unwelcome in their own community's dealership? She took a step closer to him, her voice remaining calm but carrying an edge that made everyone in the showroom lean in to listen. Yesterday, you looked at me and saw a waste of time. A woman in work clothes who couldn't possibly afford your precious inventory. You made sure everyone here knew how foolish you thought I was for even asking about that Porsche. Mark's face had gone from pale to red, his breathing becoming shallow. Look, maybe I misjudged the situation, but you didn't misjudge anything. Danielle interrupted. You saw exactly what you wanted to see. A black woman in mechanic's clothes who didn't belong in your world of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. You saw someone you could dismiss, someone you could laugh at, someone who would leave quietly and never trouble you again. The showroom was so quiet that the sound of traffic outside seemed amplified. Several customers had stopped pretending they weren't listening and were now openly watching the confrontation unfold. But here's what you didn't see, Danielle continued. You didn't see a business owner who understands customer service. You didn't see someone who's built a reputation on treating every person who walks into her shop with respect, regardless of what car they drive or how much money they have. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. Most importantly, you didn't see your new boss. Patricia Chin cleared her throat. Mr. Benson, I've reviewed your employment file, including 17 separate customer complaints over the past 2 years. Combined with what I've witnessed here today, Meridian Automotive Group has no choice but to terminate your employment effective immediately. You can't do this. Mark exploded, his composure finally shattering completely. I'm the top salesperson here. I bring in more revenue than anyone else on this floor. You can't fire me because someone got their feelings hurt. Davidson stepped forward nervously. Mark, maybe you should calm down. No. Mark turned to face the small crowd of employees and customers who had gathered to witness his downfall. This is insane. One complaint from someone who couldn't even afford to be here in the first place, and suddenly I'm the bad guy. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even Mark seemed to realize he'd gone too far, his hand flying to his mouth as if he could somehow recall the poison he just spilled. Danielle looked around the showroom at the faces staring back at her, employees horrified by what they just heard, customers uncomfortable with the ugly display of prejudice, and Mark himself, finally seeing the true cost of his arrogance. Security will escort you out, Patricia said quietly. Your personal effects will be mailed to you. As 2 security guards approached, Mark made one last desperate attempt at salvaging his career. Ms. Harris, please. I have a family. I made a mistake, but everyone deserves a second chance, right? Danielle looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the confident, mocking salesman from yesterday, but a man who had built his success on making others feel small, finally facing the consequences of his choices. Mr. Benson, she said quietly, yesterday you told me to save up for a few years and come back when I was ready for a serious conversation. I think you're the one who needs to do some saving, and some serious thinking about how you treat people. The security guards flanked Mark as he gathered what remained of his dignity and walked toward the exit. The same glass doors that had witnessed Danielle's humiliation now framed his departure. The showroom remained silent for several moments after Mark's departure, the weight of what everyone had witnessed settling over the space like dust after an explosion. Danielle looked around at the faces staring back at her, some shocked, some relieved, all waiting to see what would happen next. Patricia Chen broke the silence first. "Ms. Harris, would you like to address the staff?" Danielle nodded and walked to the center of the showroom, positioning herself near the red Porsche that had started this entire chain of events. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to reshape this dealership, while standing next to the very car she'd been told she couldn't afford. "I know this has been an unusual morning for everyone," she began, her voice carrying easily through the marble-floored space. "I imagine you're all wondering what changes are coming, what this means for your jobs, your future here." She looked around at the assembled employees, salespeople who had watched Mark's performance yesterday, service advisors who had probably heard his stories, managers who had chosen to ignore the complaints. Some looked worried, others curious, but all were listening intently. "Let me start by telling you who I am, really," Danielle continued. "Yes, I own Harris Holdings, and yes, I'm now the majority shareholder of Meridian Automotive Group. But first and foremost, I'm someone who understands what it means to work with your hands, to earn respect through service, and to treat every customer like they matter." She gestured toward the gleaming vehicles surrounding them. "These cars are beautiful, and they represent craftsmanship and engineering excellence. But they're just metal and glass and leather until we, all of us, give them meaning through the relationships we build with the people who trust us with their business." A young saleswoman near the back of the group raised her hand tentatively. "Ms. Harris, are you planning to make major staff changes?" "That depends," Danielle replied honestly. "I'm planning to make this dealership a place where every customer feels welcomed and respected, regardless of what they look like, what they drive here, or how they're dressed. Anyone who shares that vision will have my full support. Anyone who doesn't..." She let the implication hang in the air. Davidson, the general manager, stepped forward nervously. "Ms. Harris, what can we do to ensure we meet your expectations?" "It's simple," Danielle said, and she could see some of the tension leave the employees' faces. "Treat every person who walks through those doors the way you'd want your mother, your sister, your daughter to be treated. Ask questions before making assumptions. Listen more than you talk. And remember that our job isn't to decide who deserves to be here. It's to help everyone who walks in find what they're looking for." She walked over to a young black salesman who had been quietly watching from the side. "What's your name?" "Marcus, ma'am." "Marcus Thompson. How long have you been here, Marcus?" 6 months. "Still learning the ropes." Danielle smiled. "I'll bet you've never had a customer complain about feeling unwelcome when working with you." Marcus looked surprised. "No, ma'am, I haven't. I try to treat everyone the same. That's exactly the attitude I want to see from everyone here." She turned back to address the full group. "Marcus is going to help me implement some new programs. Starting next month, we're launching the Harris Automotive Scholarship, full tuition for young people from underrepresented communities who want to study automotive technology or business management." The announcement created a buzz of conversation among the staff. Patricia Chen was taking notes furiously on her tablet. "We're also starting monthly community outreach events," Danielle continued. "Free car maintenance workshops for single mothers, seniors, and anyone else who could use the help. I want this dealership to be a resource for our entire community, not just for people who can afford new luxury cars." An older salesman raised his hand. "Ma'am, will these programs affect our commission structure?" "They'll improve it," Danielle replied. "Happy customers refer more customers. A good reputation brings in more business than any advertising campaign ever could. When people trust us, when they feel valued here, our sales numbers will reflect that." She walked back to the Porsche, running her hand along its sleek surface. 2 days ago, I came in here interested in buying this car. I left without it because one person decided I didn't belong. Today, I could buy every car in this showroom, but that's not what matters. What matters is that the next person who walks in here, whether they're wearing a three-piece suit or coveralls covered in grease, gets treated with the same respect. Patricia Chen looked up from her tablet. These are ambitious changes, Ms. Harris. When would you like to begin implementation? We already have, Danielle said, then addressed the entire group. Everyone here gets a fresh start. New training programs begin next week, focusing on inclusive customer service and community engagement. We're going to prove that doing good business and doing good for our community aren't just compatible, they're inseparable. She looked around the showroom one more time, seeing it not as a place where she'd been humiliated, but as the foundation for something better. The woman who was laughed at for wanting a sports car now holds the keys to this entire operation, she said, her voice carrying a note of quiet satisfaction. But more importantly, she's going to make sure no one else ever has to walk out of here feeling the way I did 2 days ago. As the staff began to disperse, buzzing with conversation about the changes ahead, Danielle turned to Patricia. Oh, and Patricia? I'll take that red Porsche. But first, let's make sure everyone here knows that the next customer who asks about it, regardless of how they look, gets treated like the valued customer they are. The revolution at Preston Luxury Motors had begun, and it would start exactly where it should, with respect, dignity, and the simple radical notion that everyone deserves to be treated like they belong.